Thanks so much for joining our live Substack video with Gena. The topic today, the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because, Gena, you've been writing really interesting essays about builder's mindset. And this is a great
Thank
idea.
you.
It's a thread that comes through your work. And I would love you to share what you mean by builder's mindset. What are some of the
Yeah,
examples
you
you
should
see,
take
why
this
it's
off.
important? Um, yeah, and then we'll
Yeah,
see where the conversation takes us.
beautiful. And as I mentioned to you before, feel free to just signal me when I've gone on long enough because I could talk about
Sounds
this all
good.
day. Yeah, and thank you so much for inviting me to run this experiment with you, and welcome everyone who's here. Um, I'm not a queen, but thank you, Nathan. So the builder's mindset, it's a third alternative to a false dichotomy, kind of two sides of a false dichotomy that I've observed really throughout our culture, most prominently in Silicon Valley and tech circles. At least that's kind of where it first became very salient to me. This false dichotomy that I think a lot of you will recognize between, on the one side, call it, the kind of grind set, hustle culture, what I call the drill sergeant, right? The kind of drill sergeant mindset of just grind, 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 be mean to yourself, bully yourself into getting to each next rung on the ladder, which is usually a pretty conventional status ladder that you aren't really allowed to question. So kind of what a lot of people call the inner critic, right? Like who's really hard on us and kind of beats us into success. And then on the other side, and often in reaction to the oppressive, an exhausting drill sergeant, we have what I call the Zen mindset. So this is, all the kind of injunctions to self-care, to take it easy, to de-stress, to worry less about outcomes, which we can't control anyway, but really focus on the process. It's the journey, not the destination. And what I have found is that people oscillate between these two false alternatives, what I think are, false alternatives. And both alternatives end up being kind of low agency in that, on the one side, well, sure, yeah, you can hustle your way to success, but you don't actually get to define the success, right? And you don't actually, like what you feel about it, what you actually want, what you actually need, it's like irrelevant. There's no time to ask those questions, right? And so you're sort of a slave to whatever the standard you happen to internalize. Whereas on the Zen mindset, like you really don't have much agency, right? It's sort of the assumption is, look, you can't control whether you get users, whether anybody actually wants to buy your product. You can't control whether your employees perform well. All you can do is try. Like it's about the effort. Don't get too attached, which ends up kind of, I have found, whether, I don't think intentionally, but, often with the best of intentions, it ends up kind of short cutting people or kind of downsizing people's ambition. And so the builder's mindset is just a radical third alternative on which we are the owners of our life, our whole life. Life is the ultimate project, that our life is the project, and we are its sole owners and benefit, its ultimate beneficiaries, its ultimate stakeholders, which means we get to decide what is our standard of excellence, like what is worth spending our precious limited time on earth building and achieving. And then we hold ourselves accountable to the things we actually want. And we never stop asking, is this still what I want? Does this still make sense? Even in line with your work, which I love on CEO succession, it's like, do I still actually want to be in this role? And what are the trade-offs? What are the opportunity costs? And there's nobody who can tell me the right answer because this is my life, my time, my, effort. So that's kind of the builder's mindset in a nutshell.
Right. So you are outlining two extremes. On the one extreme, it's all about putting pressure on yourself, not even questioning why you are doing it, just hustling and grinding
Grind, grind, grind,
24/7.
like a robot.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
robot. And the other extreme is just letting go to the maximum, just accepting whatever happens and kind of giving up on your agency. But
Yeah.
what you're saying is,
Yeah. Sorry, just I would,
yeah,
one small modification, which is that I don't think of them as two extremes
mhm,
because I don't think that these are all on one continuum. I think the builder's mindset is a qualitatively different way of looking at the world. So I just wanted
right.
to throw that out there. And if you want, we can, double click on that.
Yes, and that's an important distinction. I see what you're making it. It's not just a compromise between the two. It's
Right.
not like a combination of a bit of hustle with a bit of self-care.
Right.
It's rather an attitude and outlook towards life that steps into the agency. And yes, works
Yes.
hard, but at the same time questions why you're doing it, takes responsibility for your choices instead of just trying to hustle as hard
Yeah,
as possible.
exactly. Yeah, beautifully summarized. Yeah.
And Gene, you're a founder, right? You work with lots of founders in Silicon Valley. You know what it's like to be under pressure from the market, from investors, from our internal pressure to perform. Uh, what helps founders to step into the builder mindset, to really reconnect to the agency and to hold external expectations
Yeah.
with a bit of perspective?
Yeah. I mean, it varies widely depending on the circumstances and what's actually like which of those many challenges and external pressures is somebody navigating. But I would say a, a through line is connecting to the why. And that's almost always part of my first conversation with founders that I coach and with just anybody that I support. Is, okay, so tell me about why are you doing this? Tell me the story of why you chose to build this company, why you chose to work for this organization, like why are you with this co-founder, whatever the case may be. And when I hear fear driven motivations, status driven motivations, or just kind of vague, unconvincing, motivations like, is this you who chose this, or was this kind of chosen for you, or did you kind of end up here as a default? Then I really try to get reconnected with with the client to some deeper source of why that actually has to do with you. Like, tell me about, it doesn't matter how far back in your life, but tell me about a time when you felt fully alive, energized, like there's nowhere you'd rather be, nothing you'd rather be doing. Just tell me about that time. Like, what were you working on? Who was around? Just to really start to understand, like, what do they love, and what do they value? What are the kinds of whys around which they plausibly could build a life? And now, okay, so let's see, how connected are those, sources of like meaning, vitality, joy? How connected are they to what you're doing now? And oftentimes they can be, and they just have become disconnected, like, but there were real reasons they started, especially, if it's their company, there was that spark of insight, inspiration, or they really loved this technology and just thought it was super cool and wanted to do something with it. But they've just forgotten about that because they're so busy trying to not disappoint their investors. Da, 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 da. So that's often the conversation.
And on this note, we've got 34 people watching this stream right now, and I just want to address everyone who's watching this live. Please ask questions
Welcome.
in the chat. You can send a message, but Gina and I will see it in real time, and we'll try to reply
Yes.
to it.
How do I
And
see the chat? Sorry.
uh, I
This
s-
is my
so
first time.
you see the list of people like this person joined, that person joined.
I do.
Yeah, so that's
I,
where the chat messages will also appear. So at the bottom of the screen.
cool. Cool.
Yeah,
Somebody send a chat so I can see it.
yeah.
No pressure. Only if you want it for yourself as a builder.
Only if you want it. What I'm saying is that it's really important to understand our individual deep motivation. What do we feel like doing? What is our true expression? Um, what is ours and what is external? Where's the line between the expectations from others and what really, really matters to us, even when no one else is looking?
That's right. Yeah. And a further wrinkle in I mean, I think it's what everything you just said resonates. The way that I would further kind of push on it is that, what we feel like doing doesn't always fully capture or fully guide what we actually, all things considered, want and need to be doing. And so, I have an article on my Substack from back when called "No Such Thing as Intrinsic Motivation." That's one of my, let's go for provocative, but I mean it, because I think that the concept of intrinsic motivation is misconceived because it assumes that there's just this like irreducible, inexplicable, like, this is just fun, this is just interesting, or it's not. Whereas if we think about the actual kinds of activities that we experience as rewarding in themselves, as joyful, interesting in themselves, there's a whole context that makes them so for us. And without that context, they could be anything but, enjoyable. And I give lots of examples in that piece. But like, part of the reason that I love coaching is because I believe that it's going to add up to real improvements in my clients' lives. And when I start to doubt that, I'm not enjoying the coaching anymore, right? Like I start to,
Yeah,
feel worried or insecure. Sometimes I notice myself being bored for a second, which is a signal to me like,
yeah, something is off.
what's going on with the session, right? But yeah, so we kind of look beneath the feelings to understand what's the full context here and what actually do we need for our lives to go well.
Yeah. And on this note, Adam just asked an interesting question in the chat. Is there a way to avoid getting stuck into the expectations that others might be pulling you into? And such a that's something which is familiar to all founders that have external investors, uh,
Indeed.
or even all founders. There are always
Yeah,
external expectations. How do we not get sucked into it?
it's a great question. Also, hi, husband. I just saw that Matt is here. That's cool. I didn't know you knew about this. It's look, the word is spreading. That's so cool. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I would almost say there's almost no way to avoid getting sucked in. I mean, if you are so lucky as to just have like grown up with such an internalized kind of epistemic independence and self-trust that you're just not tempted to kind of interject, as I sometimes call it, into kind of like worry about other people's opinions in a way that then get confused with your own opinions. But even then, I think it's often really hard to differentiate when we're still trying to work out our own desires and our view. Everything's an input. And if we respect someone, trust someone, they have more experience than us, it can be really hard to disentangle. Okay, so they're telling me I absolutely need to like wait to talk to other investors until this demo day. This is salient for me right now with the founders I'm coaching. Okay, is that right? Like, do I actually believe that? What are my priorities and what does my company need? And so it's not so much that you never get sucked in, it's that you can't just stop there. Treat it as an input, but don't treat it as the output. Like you've got to process it for yourself and sort of triangulate it with everything else or can learn
Yeah.
from the world.
This really reminds me of something I read about in the book Difficult Conversations, about how to have difficult and meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
And one of the key things the authors say is that um, it's unrealistic to hope that difficult conversations will ever stop be difficult. But it's possible to learn how to have them in a constructive way instead of
Yes.
have destructive and unhelpful difficult conversations. And so I feel
Yes.
like what you're saying is that there will always be expectations of others. There will always be others with their agenda and the external world pulling in another direction. But that's not a problem in itself. It's how we respond to it, how we balance
Well, and how
our.
like do and whether we process it for ourselves, right? It's
Mhm,
sort of like the default is we just internalize these things and just passively like become the average of all the voices that
yeah,
have infiltrated our heads. And then it's a kind of
yeah,
sad default because we're not us, we're just a
yeah,
mirror of whatever we happen to absorb by osmosis, right, from our surroundings. But our agency, if we actually really turn it on, activate it, part of my view is that fundamentally our agency is in how we think and is in choosing to actually think for ourselves,
mhm,
to like take in the input and then, okay, but is that true? Do I believe that? Like what else do I know that I can kind of triangulate with this? Who else can I talk to that would potentially help me see another
mhm,
perspective or kind of fill out the full picture? And then ultimately having the courage, even when our conclusion differs
mhm,
from the investors, from our from
yeah,
whatever stakeholders, to then have the courage of our conviction and to be able to, and that's where hard conversations are very relevant. I'm glad you brought
yeah,
them up. One of the most common issues I help people with, like across all stages of founding, that's where having the courage to actually give the feedback or to actually articulate the disagreement in a way that's respectful, that's honest, direct, and
yeah.
constructive, but like don't just capitulate.
As I'm listening to you, what's going on through my mind is various psychological terms, true self and false self. And I know that you're familiar with it as a. So how do I say it correctly? Yeah, I know that you are trained in you're trained in
And
psychology.
I am.
You're
I'm a psychologist. I mean, you can
you're a
call me
psychologist.
anything at this point. I'm a founder psychologist, or I'm just a
Yeah,
psychologist, founder, coach, whatever you want to call me.
yeah. But I mean, unlike many coaches, unlike most coaches, you've got deep and professional training in psychology. Um, and what I was saying is that I wonder how. willing our founders to go into psychological territory because really we are talking about deep self-inquiry, really understanding ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know that some founders are really up for it and others not so much.
I mean, as is true of humans generally, perhaps slightly overrepresented in founders. You said awkward. Did I hear that right? That they're
No,
oh, no, you
no, I
didn't
just
say
said
that.
that.
Sorry, I'm hearing, I guess what fits my schemas.
Yeah, I was saying that some people are up for it and
Oh,
others.
sorry. I'm so sorry. That's funny. Yes, awkward or not, they may well be up for it. Yeah, I mean, I have a kind of dual perspective on this. One, you are, as a founder, your first customer, your first employee, your first investor, your first stakeholder, and the whole thing rests on you. And your psychology is the rate limiter on how good your startup can get. And so this is something that I, convey to founders whenever I address them in a group, and it's in a lot of my writing, that if you don't take seriously your psychological growth and needs, your motivations, if you don't build self-awareness, founders who've been at it a while or who are repeat founders who've had successful exits, one of the most common things I hear them say is self-awareness. That's the make or break. You've got to know when you're annoyed at someone versus when you're feeling insecure versus, and like that will affect your decision making, and that will affect your relationships with co-founders, employees, investors, customers, everybody. So, and you will burn out if you don't actually stay connected to your motivation and to what energizes you. Like one way or another, you've got to care about your psychology, and you've got to address it and attend to it. And that's true in the context of the life you're building, the company you're building. And oftentimes there's a lot you can get away with. There's a lot you can deprioritize. And the kinds of things that founders often start to kind of obsess with on the self-improvement front end up actually becoming kind of degenerating into navel gazing exercises or into kind of like permission seeking exercises, like, because as a founder, there's nobody to get permission from anymore, and that's such a foreign and scary way to live for many people who are so used to like school, and you need to pass this test to then go on to the next, right? And so there's this kind of way that it gets internalized as a permission, like, am I good enough, healthy enough, am I doing the right set of things? I'm, like, have I processed my trauma? Have I done enough shadow work that now I can actually make decisions about my startup, or that now I can go and like hire great people? Like, no, 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 no. Building a great startup and hiring great people is the best possible way to improve your psychological health. And so, when I say build yourself by building, like,
Mhm.
it's in the context of doing things in the world that you care about, that have real stakes, that you do improve yourself ultimately.
Well, exactly. We need the resistance and the challenge from the external world in order to work on ourselves, just like we need
Yeah,
weights in the gym in order to stress our bodies in order to grow stronger. Uh,
exactly.
I know that we're about to wrap up. We've got to stop in about 1 minute or so, but any final words before we close this live chat?
Good question. I mean, I guess I would just say we've been mostly using examples from the founding journey and, the kind of context of founders. But anybody listening who, probably most of you are not founders or not founders at this moment, like that doesn't narrowly apply. The builder's mindset is for everyone. And the way that I've really come to see human nature is through this lens of like what I've learned working with startup founders, which is all of us are making it up as we go. All of us are choosing the projects that are going to, fulfill us in our lives. All of us get to break the rules if we decide that they're worth breaking. You don't have to be a founder to live entrepreneurially and to treat your life
Hmm.
as your startup, as your building
Yeah,
project. So I encourage it.
yes. And you don't have to be a founder to have a builder's mindset, to have
Exactly.
agency, to really take control of your life. Uh,
Exactly.
Gina, thank you so much for taking the time to participate. Thank you to over 50 people who joined this live stream. If you joined
Thank you.
a little bit late, the recording will be available on Substack. So leave a comment, click like, and the full video will be there very, very soon. Uh,
This was so
Thanks
fun.
again. Yeah, it was so
Thank
fun.
you.
Let's do it again. Let's do it
Let's do it
again.
again.
Absolutely.
Good.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone. Have an amazing day.
You too. Thanks, Evgeny.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. See you again soon.
Thanks so much.